My name is Matt and this is my story. I want to talk about a topic today that I find personally is a bit under-discussed. I hear lots of discussions about how to find happiness, probably the one that's over-discussed in my opinion. I try to talk about things more in terms of finding fulfillment, finding meaning in the things that you do with your life. I think that's a little bit more accurate as far as my conception of what I think we're all really after. And if you've ever sat and asked yourself, well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, but I don't really feel happy. I don't feel this sense of fulfillment. Or maybe you're contemplating a decision and thinking like, well, I'm not sure whether I should do this or do that. What's the right way to go? What's the thing that's going to get me closer to what it is that I'm pursuing? Really, I think the starting place for all of that type of discussion is first sitting down and examining your values. And your values is really going to be the driving factor in why you decide to do what it is you do. And let's think about why that is. At the beginning of this video, I'm going to put up a quote that's often attributed to Aristotle, but I think it's more accurately attributed to a guy named Will Durant. He says, well, we repeatedly do. Right? So your excellence, or let's take that maybe a little bit of a step further and say like whatever it is that you're going to accomplish in life is going to be the result of your actions, particularly the actions that you keep repeating over and over and over again. If you dig down into that a little step deeper, what is it that drives those actions? Well, probably your wants, desires, needs, and how do you determine what those are? At the fundamental, basic level, it's your values, the things that you consider valuable, whether you're aware of it or not. So if that's going to be true, then it's worth our while, it's worth our time to sit down and think through, okay, what are my values? What sort of things do I think are valuable? Let's touch base here a little bit on some things that I think values are not necessarily. So that we all know what it is that we're talking about. For example, if you just say, well, my values are just be a good person.
Family.
Just be nice to other people.
Family.
The golden rule, like you should treat others the way that you would like to be treated.
Family.
In my mind, that falls short of being truly a value or a set of values. That's more kind of a vague goal, and really it's not really actionable, because just saying, well, be a good person, well, that doesn't really differentiate you from 99.999% of the rest of the human population. Just about all of us agree that you ought to be a good person. It needs to be a lot more defined than that and a lot more specific than that in order to be useful for you.
You gonna turn your back on family?
Let's get into this a little bit deeper. The first time I was asked to define my values, my very first job after graduating with my undergraduate degree, the company that I was working for decided to put a bunch of us through some training that was done by a consultant from Franklin Covey. And it was actually very interesting training. A lot of it was oriented around productivity and how to schedule your workday and stuff like that. But one of the things that they threw in there, which was actually a really cool concept in retrospect, they asked you to define your values, and you actually write them down, and you keep this in mind as you're scheduling your day, because the idea is if you have your values in mind as you're scheduling your day and you're writing out, I'm going to do this in this hour, this in this hour, well, you're sort of baking your values into your day and programming them as part of your action. The only thing is, I was not at the same level of maturity and introspection then as I am now. So this was just sort of on the fly in the middle of a training session that they ask you to write down your values, and I wrote down 8 of them. There's really only one of those values that I wrote down then that is still with me today. Some of the rest of them I can't even remember, and the other ones, they were really just sort of generic stuff, and they really didn't have a deep and powerful meaning for me. But the one value that I did write down that has stuck with me to this day, I very firmly believe in, and that's probably the one out of everything that I've contemplated for a long time and really did mean something to me then. It still means a lot to me now. So the first time I actually sat down to try to codify my values with a specific intent. I was working with a life coach, and this was one of the very first things that he started with. And as I reflect back on it, I can see why it's a very intuitive place to start, especially if you're trying to take a serious approach to your life and you will want to achieve meaningful results. It really is the fundamental place that you need to start because it drives everything. And this was after a long career and a lot of other life experiences where I had shut down a lot of the introspective part of my life. I was just knuckling down and getting work done, and I found that in the process of trying to write down my values, it was extremely difficult. I would sit there and just think. I was staring out the window. I was looking at the snow falling down outside the window, and I would just start with words, just an individual word. It was sort of a very, very basic level brainstorming session, and I would write a word down, and I'd let it go, and then I'd start thinking through other things, and I just started that until I started getting a collection of words together, and then I had to start processing those words and trying to connect dots in my mind. What does this mean? Is this really just a different version of this? Is this really this? Does that really mean something to me or no? Is that just sort of a nice concept? That was really just the starting point, even though that seemed like a lot of work at the time. I've come back to this periodically and refined my code of values. And it's been interesting to see how this has progressed over time, because I have this now written down in notebooks. This is my most recent one. I have other ones that I've written in through the years. And some of them have stuck with me. And like I said, that first one from almost 20 years ago now has stuck with me the longest. Some of them have been discarded along the way, or as I've contemplated them, it's not necessarily that I discarded them, but I sort of conceptualized them as like, well, this is really kind of redundant, because what I feel like this means to me is actually really captured in this one, and it's not really its own separate thing. And then there have been other ones that have come up for me that I would never have imagined that would have a lot of meaning to me. And now I've discovered that they are immensely meaningful. I'll just give you one value here as a way of an example, and we can sort of break that down a little bit. Now, this value, as I conceive of it, is defined by the word freedom. That sort of leads me into a very important topic here, is that it's more important that you not just write a word down, but that you evolve a very deep and complete meaning of what that word means to you, how you're applying this value. And some of my understanding or descriptions of my values have evolved over time. This has been a process of years, actually going out and testing that in my life, in real world applications, and seeing how it plays out, and saying like, well, is this definition accurate? Is this meaning accurate? Or is there a better meaning? And then coming back and refining it and getting to the point where I feel like I have a complete meaning of that word or of that value. How do I define freedom for myself today? I'm going to put a graphic up here on the screen so that you can follow along with me as I work through the logic behind what freedom is to me, but then also what it is not. So if you have this quadrant here, where on one axis you have agency is how I define it, and then on the other axis you have responsibility. And agency specifically meaning your personal agency, your ability to make decisions on your own behalf. Freedom would be the part of this quadrant where those two overlap in a positive way, where you have a high degree of personal agency of making decisions on your own behalf, but you also have a high level of responsibility. And the way that I would sort of succinctly summarize that is you can make whatever decisions you like so long as you are willing to deal with the consequences of those decisions. And specifically, if I could put an emphasis on that, I would say so long as you are willing to deal with the consequences of those decisions. And if we can sort of juxtapose that against some of the other areas in this quadrant, so if you go down to this next quadrant here, where you have very high level of responsibility, but a low level of personal agency, this is what I would define as kind of like servitude. Really, a lot of sort of low level management jobs fit well into this category. There's things that you're expected to take ownership of, but at the same time, you don't have a high level of decision-making authority. A lot of times you don't have hiring or firing capabilities in these types of roles, but yet you're expected to accomplish things. And so it's kind of, if you've been in roles like this, you know exactly what it is I'm saying. It's not always necessarily fun to be in these kinds of roles. It's still certainly very desirable to being in the next quadrant over, where you have a low level of responsibility and a low level of personal agency. And there's not a lot of things that fit into this category, but the one that sort of naturally comes to mind is essentially it's slavery, right? You can't make any decisions on your own behalf, but at the same time you don't have a lot of responsibility. All you're doing is just focusing on these job functions you're given to do, and that's it. Somebody else has to figure out how to feed you. Somebody else has to figure out how to clothe you, give you shelter, figure out how to get you water, like all of these major life decisions you don't have any responsibility for. Someone else has to figure out how to do those things for you, because your only function is to do whatever work it is that they tell you to do. It's miserable when you describe it that way. It's like a horrifying thing to think of, and that's why I think it fits very neatly into the quadrant of being the opposite of freedom. And the last one here, where you have a high level of personal autonomy, you can make decisions for yourself, but you have a low level of responsibility. It's kind of a novel thing. Really, what that describes in a way is sort of adolescence, particularly adolescence for the last, let's say, half a century, where you have somebody that's running interference for you as far as providing a house for you to stay. It's very common now for a lot of adolescents to even have cars provided to them by their parents as soon as they get to the right age. Someone's buying you food, someone's paying for you to go to college, or whatever. And so you kind of live in this nice existence where you can do things that you choose to do or want to do, but you don't really have to deal with any of the responsibilities of making those things happen. Or if you make bad decisions, somebody's running interference for you to make sure that they don't end up too bad. And in a way, in my mind, growing trend in governments that I observe is sort of extending an offer to prolong this sense of adolescence. It's like, well, we're going to pass laws in a certain way that people can live the types of lives they want to live, but the consequences of bad decisions gets passed on to society. Right? You don't have to stomach all of the bad consequences of those decisions yourself. And you may or may not disagree with me, and that's okay. We don't have to make it a political discussion here for the sake of this, but I'm trying to fill out all these areas of the quadrant so that you can see what I'm getting at here when I'm discussing freedom. Where freedom is specifically you have the ability to make your choices, but you also bear whatever consequences are of your decisions, be they good consequences or bad consequences. This concept of freedom, it's become very, very powerful to me, and it's been a strong value with a lot of meaning to me for a long time. But the longer I'm alive, the more that keeps speaking to me, and the more I can see how it manifests itself in my life, or how I want it to manifest in my life, and then I am consciously trying to take further and further actions to promote more and more of this freedom in my life. And so just taking this concept of freedom, you think through, well, if this is what I really believe in, let's say, and I want to have more of this freedom in my life, then I have to start thinking through, well, what sorts of lifestyle decisions am I going to make for how I spend my time? What sort of jobs am I going to pursue or not pursue? What sort of a career is going to fit well with this type of a value, and what sorts of careers will not fit well with this type of value? What sort of communities or societies do I intentionally want to live in or not live in because I want to have more of this value in my life? What sorts of friends, people, mindsets do I want to associate with and surround myself with because I want to have more of this value in my life? And you can see how with just this one value, you start narrowing down. Like, there's a lot of things that you can do in this world, but a lot of these aren't going to fit because I value this particular thing in my life, And it makes my decision-making process a lot easier, because I find that the more and more freedom I have in my life, the more and more meaning I get out of my life, the more fulfillment I feel in my life. And so I'm intentionally going to target these types of things, and I'm intentionally not going to target these types of things because they don't fit well with this value. This is sort of like an introductory video. I've got a couple more videos planned where I want to discuss this topic of values in a little bit more detail and see how they apply to different types of things in different types of situations. So this is just sort of a jump off point. Hopefully there was something in this video that you found useful, because this is really the main reason that I'm making videos like this, is because it's taken me a while to come to some of these conclusions for myself. So any bit of knowledge or wisdom I can pass along to help somebody else sort of jumpstart, their progress towards living a meaningful life, that's really what I'm after. And if you have any thoughts along these lines, things that you'd like to share, I'm also interested to build a community on this channel of people who can share ideas, benefit from each other's experience and insights. So please feel free to drop me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Like and subscribe if you'd like. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.
And it just got bigger.